Hello, friends. The 1,251 day of the war between Russia and Ukraine continues. At the end of last week, Russian troops made significant progress near Kupiansk in the Kharkiv direction. According to Deep State, they broke through in the area of the village of Kalinovi, and now the fighting is taking place 2 kilometers from the highway that leads to Kupiansk from Kharkiv. According to the Telegram channel, the Ukrainian armed forces are trying to dislodge the Russians, who are trying to gain a foothold along the road from Rakivka and from Golubivka towards the private sector. The situation is complicated by the fact that the enemy has a large penetration area up to Malifka. The enemy's goal is obvious: to stretch the combat formations of the Ukrainian defense forces, to wedge in and further block the city from the western side, writes Deep State. The head of the military administration, Besedin, said that the Russians have sharply complicated logistics in Kupiansk. According to him, it is impossible to move around the city by car. Russian forces immediately strike with FPV drones. It is also impossible to bring food and medicine there without any communications. We cannot bring in food and hygiene products to help our people, Besedin said. Further south, in the Lyman section of the Kharkiv direction, the Russians reported a major breakthrough and allegedly advanced 5 kilometers into the Cerebriansk forest. According to them, Russian units have planted flags in the area of Lake Chernikovo and on the territory of the former tourist base, and have also advanced toward the administration of the Cerebriansk Forestry Reserve. A Ukrainian serviceman with the call sign Muchnoy confirms that fighting is underway in the area of the tourist base. However, according to him, there is no talk of Russia gaining full control over this area. Our serviceman notes that the terrain in the forest is difficult to attack due to dense undergrowth and limited visibility, and Ukrainian forces continue to hold their positions, repelling individual infiltration attempts. According to the Deep State map, the entire specified territory is now under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces. The Russian Defense Ministry announced the capture of the village of Maliivka in the Dnipropetrovsk region. Ukraine has not confirmed this. On the Deep State map, Maliivka is under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces, although the front line in this area has come very close to the borders of the Dnipropetrovsk region. At the same time, Bild military observer Julian Rupp confirms the loss of Maliivka and writes that Russian troops have entered the Dnipropetrovsk region for the 3rd time in a row. According to him, Ukraine had built powerful lines of anti-tank fortifications in this settlement in advance, including concrete, dragon's teeth, and trenches. However, they were left without cover due to a lack of infantry, and were eventually lost. Fighter Muchnoy writes that Maliivka is partially under our control. The enemy periodically shells and tests the strength of the village's flank defense. There is an accumulation of manpower and armored vehicles to the south, with signs of a possible assault in the future if the enemy consolidates its position in the Voskresenka area. A special situation is developing near Pokrovsk. Last week, its assault essentially began. Ukrainian telegram channels are increasingly reporting that sabotage and reconnaissance groups are penetrating the city from the southwest. Russian military bloggers claim that these are not sabotage groups, but advance units of the Russian army. At the same time, the Ukrainian military admits that the Russian offensive is not being carried out in a continuous front, but scattered in small groups that, if possible, infiltrate the rear of the Ukrainian armed forces unnoticed and accumulate there for future attacks. It is likely that the recent battle within the city of Pokrovsk itself began with one of these. But the very existence of such groups suggests that the city's defense is also not continuous, but focal, which allows Russian soldiers to periodically enter Pokrovsk. In any case, the pressure on the city has increased significantly in recent days, and we can say that a direct assault on the city has begun. Russia's advance is proceeding in a pincer manner. On the one hand, in the southwest, in the Zverovi area. By the way, a number of Ukrainian and Russian telegram channels are writing about its complete capture, on the other in the northeast, in the Rodinsky area. The most intense fighting is taking place south of Pokrovsk, from where the infiltrations are taking place. Moreover, according to Ukrainian military telegram channels and Western media, units of the Ukrainian armed forces are experiencing a severe shortage of personnel, which explains, in particular, the infiltration of Russians into the city limits. According to Western journalists, Russia has concentrated significant forces around Pokrovsk, about 111,000 people. Zelensky confirmed that the situation remains extremely tense, but the defense of Pokrovsk is holding. At the same time of the major roads, only the highway to Pavlograd remains under Ukrainian control, but it is already mainly under Russian fire. In particular, drones are intensively hitting it, greatly complicating the logistics of the Ukrainian army. Overall, the situation is very tense for the Ukrainian army. The key to further developments will be the battles for the flanks in this section of the front. For Udachny and Kotlany to the southwest of Pokrovsk, and for Rodinsky to the northeast of Myrnorod, which itself is becoming a battlefield, since the Russians, according to Ukrainian military data, have begun to infiltrate the city from the east. Much will also depend on whether Ukrainian troops can prevent further penetration of Russian forces into Pokrovsk from Zvirovy and recreate a single defense contour for the city. Today, the U.S. President made an important statement from the UK on Ukraine and Russia. He said he would reduce his deadline for Moscow to end the war in Ukraine from 50 days to 10 or 12 days. I'm going to set a new deadline of 10 or 12 days. Starting today, there's no point in waiting 50 days. I'd like to be magnanimous, but we're just not seeing any progress. I think I already know what's going to happen, he said. After that deadline, which Trump will officially announce today or tomorrow, secondary sanctions against Russia could follow. But the U.S. president said he didn't want to impose them because he loves the Russian people. To all this, Trump added again that he was disappointed in Putin, who he believed was dragging out the war instead of trading with the U.S. and getting rich. Putin wanted to do trade deals with us. He talks about it all the time. And I imagine that we could have a lot of trade with Russia. They have a lot of valuable resources. If we talk about rare earth metals, they really have a lot of them. They have almost all possible types. So, Russia could be very rich now. Instead, they spend all the money on war. All on war and killing, and it makes no sense to me. I thought he would want to end it all as soon as possible, the U.S. president said. And now, the main question is what will happen if Putin does not agree to a ceasefire within the established deadline? Trump himself has already answered this question. He said that he would introduce secondary sanctions, 100% duties on countries buying Russian energy resources, putting them before a choice: either continue to buy oil and gas from Russia and lose the U.S. market, or stop buying Russian fuel and avoid 100% duties. Previously, there were many doubts, including in the West, whether Trump would decide to introduce secondary sanctions, which could cause an increase in oil prices and a new round of the world trade war. The fact that Trump shortened the ultimatum period may indicate that he is still ready to impose 100% sanctions. Perhaps this was influenced by yesterday's trade deal with the European Union, which committed to increasing purchases of American energy instead of Russian. Perhaps there are also some publicly unannounced agreements with Saudi Arabia to increase production, and with India on the latter's refusal to purchase Russian oil. The introduction of duties against countries buying Russian energy resources will potentially be a huge blow to Russia's export revenues. But only on one condition: if China obeys the secondary U.S. sanctions and refuses to buy energy from Russia. If China does not refuse to purchase, and, in response to Trump's introduction of 100% duties on its goods, introduces 100% duties on American goods, and other countries may very well follow suit, then the United States will likely be forced to retreat and lift the secondary sanctions against Russia. Moreover, if Washington warns China about this in advance, it is quite possible that secondary sanctions will not be imposed. And if the duties remain, they will not cause serious damage to Russia. The United States has no other means of influencing Russia as powerful as secondary sanctions, except, of course, direct entry into a war with Russia, which Washington will not do due to the threat of a nuclear conflict. In total, there are now 4 scenarios for the development of events. The first is that China makes it clear that it intends to submit to secondary U.S. sanctions and Russia agrees to a ceasefire, perhaps having tried to bargain more concessions from the United States in return. I will note that today Turkish President Erdogan said that a peace table will soon be set up in Turkey, and this bloody war between Ukraine and Russia will end. He did not explain what he meant. But earlier, Russia denied the possibility of an imminent meeting with Trump or Zelensky. The second is that China makes it clear that it intends to submit to secondary U.S. sanctions. But the Kremlin decides to continue the war in virtual isolation, while cutting social infrastructure and other non-military spending with the prospect of a severe economic crisis in a long war of attrition. Third, the Kremlin will perceive secondary American sanctions as a declaration of war and will escalate sharply, up to an ultimatum with a threat of a nuclear strike on the United States if the sanctions are not lifted. And fourth, China does not refuse to buy Russian oil and gas. In response to the introduction of American duties on Chinese goods, Beijing introduces its own on American goods. Following China, a number of other countries continue to buy oil and gas from Russia. This minimizes Russia's losses. The war continues in its current format.
Friends, I want to develop and strive for higher quality content, but my 2009 computer does not allow me to do this. If you have the opportunity to help me buy a new computer and make my dream come true, I will be very grateful to you. You will find the link in the description under the video and in the pinned comment. Thank you very much and see you in the next video.